Welcome everybody. My name is Lisa Van Bokove and I'm, for those of you who don't know me, the Clinical Informatics Director here in the CIH. Before we get started, I just wanted to acknowledge today that the lands that I meet on, and many of you may be meeting on as well, is the lands of the Kaurna people. And I'd like to acknowledge that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country, and also to acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians to the Greater Adelaide region. And I'd also like to acknowledge the other lands that people might be dialing into from today. So this is our first episode in Series 19 on clinical registries, improving care through quality insights. So clinical registries play an important role in improving healthcare by collecting and analysing patient outcomes. They help clinicians and services understand where care varies, compare performance, and use these insights to improve care over time. That's why clinical registries are a key focus within the CIH priority focus area on data-driven clinical decision-making. This reflects our commitment to improving how clinical registries are developed, connected, and used across South Australia. So in this first episode, what we're talking about is how strong governance is what turns the registry data into safe and usable insight. This episode explores how clinical registry governance within national frameworks, including a clear definition of clinical registries and the role that they play in delivering value-based care and system-wide improvement. This episode also highlights how the Southern Adelaide Local Health Network, or SALHN, is moving from a fragmented registry practice into a more consistent governance model. So today we have three speakers with us. The first is Tamara Hooper, who is the Strategic Director at the SAHMRI Registry Centre. She's an experienced project manager who has led and managed many complex research projects, managed the registry nested clinical trials portfolio while at the Australian Orthopaedic Association National Joint Replacement Registry. She also established the Australasian Cardiac Outcomes Registry Transcatheter Aortic Valve Implantation Registry, and she's held a range of commercial healthcare roles nationally within the education, marketing and sales environments as well. Next, we'll be hearing from the team down at SALHN, so Professor Andrew Bersten, who is currently the Executive Director of Research. He served for many years as an ICU Director within SALHN and also as a Clinical Director of Medicine, Cardiac and Critical Care. And in his current role as the Executive Director of Research at SALHN, he oversees both the integrity and strategic aspects. Given his pivotal role of data across all aspects of healthcare, with particular focus on registries, continuous improvement and research, he also acts as SALHN's data custodian. Following the implementation of a data governance framework, a contemporary approach to both current and future registries is underway. Joining him from SALHN is Karen Saxty, who is the Director of Research Operations. She's got over 25 years experience in clinical care research and data governance and registry-based systems. She's recognised for delivering data-driven infrastructure that supports ethical research, clinical improvements and learning health systems. Karen holds a Bachelor of Health Science and also is a Certified Health Informatician of Australia. She specialises in population health data systems and evidence-based practice with a strong focus on clinical registries and real-world data. Without further ado, I'll pass over to Tamara, who is our first speaker.
Thanks, Lisa. Everybody can hear me okay? Yes? Fabulous. All right. So thank you very much to the CIH for the invitation to present today. Unfortunately, I've only got 20 minutes to provide you with an overview of registry governance. I think that, to get this right, we could actually run a whole day workshop on this. So bear with me because it is going to be a very high level overview of what we're doing. All right, and just to echo Lisa as well, I'd also like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the lands of the Kaurna people. and also acknowledge that the traditional owners also, wherever you might actually be. So the presentation today will actually position registry governance within the 2024 National Clinical Quality Registry Framework, and also what we call the strategy. So that was the 2020-2030 National Clinical Quality Registry Strategy. So as this is actually the first presentation in this series, I think it's really important for us to actually start with defining what clinical registries and clinical quality registries are, and their role in defining value-based care and system-wide improvement. I'm also going to be focusing on how we demonstrate how well governance can support high-quality research, inform policy, and drive continuous improvement in care. I'm going to also outline the common governance challenges, and at a high level, they're things like consent, data stewardship, access processes, and stakeholder engagement. And then finally finish off with a showcase of the work of the SAHMRI Registry Centre. So just to preface first, I just want everyone to understand that clinical registries, clinical quality registries, are actually different to research. The primary purpose of the majority of registries is actually around quality improvement. So that's my first point. The next thing I want to do is actually use the definitions that have been provided by the Commission's framework, so that you can actually understand what the difference is between a clinical registry and a clinical quality registry. So clinical registries are databases. They operate within an overall governance and management structure to systematically collect health-related information on individuals. Now, they might fall into three different domains. The first domain being around products, so where you're actually treated with a surgical procedure, a device, or a drug, for example. So a heart valve, or the TAVI registry, which is what Lisa was explaining earlier. Then other registries might be around a disease or a condition, or where you're diagnosed with a particular illness, for example, the stroke registry, which is actually a binational registry. Or it might be in relation to a domain around health service. So where you're actually providing a healthcare resource, for example, in an intensive care unit where the ANZIC core registry has been running for at least 30 years. So there's three different types of domains within the clinical registries as well. Clinical registries are actually observational in nature, and they observe practice in the real world without dictating the care that's actually to be given. So moving on to clinical quality registries. So clinical quality registries, again, they are a type of clinical registry, again, systematically monitoring the appropriateness and effectiveness of healthcare within those clinical domains, but they have an additional purpose where they actually drive ongoing improvements in the safety and quality in the health system. What you'll find is that the CQRs, or clinical quality registries, are more mature. They have highly developed processes. They often operate at national or binational sort of geographic domains, and they're at population scale. So the aim is actually to collect all patients. And they also involve a diverse team, which is a little different to clinical registries. So the critical purpose of clinical quality registries in Australia is about driving improvement in safety and quality. And they do this by analysing data and generating risk-adjusted reports, or what we call outputs. And they provide these reports in a usable format and timely manner back to the stakeholders who can actually use that information to improve health outcomes. So the reporting function, or the outputs that they actually produce, is the most visible output or the work of the clinical quality registry. So I just want to frame that first so that everybody understands what we're actually talking about here. So registries actually vary quite a lot in their purpose, their scale, how they actually operate, the data that they collect, the outputs that they produce, and the level of engagement that they have with their stakeholders. But in general terms, their governance structures align with the following key principles. They have clear responsibility for the decisions and the outcomes, so that there's a level of accountability. They have documented and transferable defensible processes, so they're transparent. They try to maintain themselves as being independent so that they're not influenced by funders or stakeholders. They are consumer-centric, so involving consumers in every aspect of the registry so that they can really get the patient perspective. Again, meeting legal and regulatory compliance is really important for a registry. The scientific rigour, again, another key principle, which actually supports the reliable data and also making the registry actually valid. Sustainability is actually, is here as a key principle, but it's probably one of the biggest challenges that faces clinical quality registries. And what it's really about is actually making sure that there is the capability and operability of them for the long term. So what does good governance actually look like? So if we start with a clear governance structure, a documented governance framework should actually define who the registry sponsor or custodian is. They usually involve a number of different committees. So you might have a steering committee, a scientific or advisory committee. You'll then have a data access committee. And then you have your operations team, which actually then, surrounds the whole registry, and obviously participating sites and investigators. And each of these groups should have clearly defined roles, responsibilities, and decision-making authorities and reporting lines. Then strong leadership. So clinical leadership is actually really vital here because it ensures that the registry remains clinically relevant and credible. And the registry should actually have an identified clinical lead or registry chair. They should have a multi-D clinical representation within their structure, as well as representation from participating sites. And mechanisms then also for engaging relevant professional societies within their governance structure. Talked a little bit before about consumer and patient involvement, but contemporary registry governance should include meaningful consumer participation through having consumer representatives on all of the governance committees, having input into registry priorities and outcomes, and also them being involved in any sort of patient-facing material that actually gets released, as well as the findings, the dissemination of the findings or the outputs or reports that are actually sent out. So this actually also helps the registry address any outcomes that are actually important to patients. If we then look at our ethical and legal oversight, so the registry should demonstrate compliance with our ethics committee requirements, any legal legislation, privacy legislation, data protection requirements, as well as our processes around consent or opt-out depending upon the model that's been approved, and then also some site governance requirements. And then behind all that there's a whole heap of policies and processes. If we're looking then at data governance framework, so a robust data governance framework should define, as I said before, the data ownership and custodianship. So who owns the data? Who acts as the custodian? What are the rights and responsibilities of participating sites? For data access, what's the process for requesting access? What are the approval pathways? What are the conditions for use? And then what are the publication requirements? When it comes to actually sharing data, who are the external collaborators? Who are you giving it to? What are the linkage activities? And are there actually any commercial access requirements required as part of this? If we go on to transparent decision making, so there should be a committee terms of reference, it should be current, it should be publicly available, and where appropriate, good governance actually requires documented processes for who's actually appointed to the committee, what sort of conflict of interest management there is. There should be a SOP around that, who approves registry changes, who approves research proposals and publication requests and data access requests. When we look at quality management and risk oversight, so regular reporting should enable the identification and management of emerging risks, and governance committees should oversee that sort of quality monitoring, the data completeness, the validation processes, any sort of risk management, and also any cybersecurity risk. Scientific oversight is often undertaken by an advisory committee or publication committee, and there should be associated processes for, again, how you actually approve those and the review of those. We talked a little bit already about the sustainability, but funding arrangements shouldn't actually compromise scientific independence. As far as key performance indicators go, they should be established and reviewed periodically. The governing body, usually delegated again to the steering committee, should then review those indicators on a regular basis. They should be involved in the registry objectives and a strategic plan. We should be looking at, the performance around site participation, any data quality matrix, what the reports look like, and then coming back to what the impact is on healthcare and outcomes. Then finally, behind all of this, there's a whole gamut of policies and documentation and standard operating procedures that goes behind all of that as well. So what you see here on the screen is actually, I guess, what we're referring to now in the registry sector space. The two documents I mentioned earlier. So the Australian framework, which came out in August 2024, developed by the Australian Commission, is our sort of go-to guideline Bible now around how we structure ourselves as far as national clinical quality registries go. And that has been based around the priority action areas that have come from the strategy document, which you can see down in that right corner. There's in those documents, they have strategic principles, operating principles, as well as information, the how-to bit. But a common structure, what you'll find here in Australia and around the clinical quality registry, is about having a steering committee that has the strategic oversight, a wide range of stakeholders, and has accountability for registry performance. Then having a clinical advisory committee where there is that clinical direction, reviews the indicators, which I've mentioned already, as well as the interpretation of the findings. The Data Access and Publication Committee is there responsible for the data requests, the research proposals, reviewing the publications. And then behind all of this, supporting then are the registry operations team, which it will include a clinical lead, a registry manager, a data manager, a statistician, a data analyst, and I'm probably forgetting a couple of different roles in there. But they're really there to run the day-to-day management of the registry, support sites with the data collection, ensure that the data collection data is actually of quality, and facilitate the reports and the outputs. And then across all of those committees and that structure are the consumers who actually participate across all of those activities. There's a number of different challenges, however, and they relate to balancing stakeholder interests, ensuring high quality data, maintaining long-term sustainability, supporting continuous quality improvement, enabling research, operating within ethical and research frameworks, meeting regulatory obligations, and managing consent processes effectively. So again, coming back to stakeholder interests, so managing the diverse expectations and priorities of patients is really key here, and maintaining the primary focus of the registry around quality improvement objectives. Ensuring that the data is of quality, so having established robust processes to achieve accurate, complete, timely and consistent data collection across participating sites, whilst minimising reporting burdens. Not going to go on any further around funding sustainability. I've done that already a couple of times. Making sure that there is actually this quality feedback loop where it is continuous. So having a mechanism in place to evaluate the purpose and impact of what you do and what you produce is really important, and doing that regularly. Ensuring the value of the registry and the outputs that are produced are fit for purpose and translated into actionable insights that lead to measurable changes in clinical practice and patient outcomes. This is actually a challenge for registries, and particularly those who actually don't close that loop and get that feedback from their stakeholders. Whilst it's not actually the primary purpose of clinical registries, registries contain population scale data sets, so they are well placed to support research activities. But again, that can be a bit of a challenge, I guess, working within a registry space. And then finally, operating within a research paradigm. So navigating the overlap between quality assurance, quality improvement, and research activities, including the varying ethical and governance requirements across jurisdictions and institutions. This is really, I guess, particularly challenging during the establishment of the registry. The majority of registries, clinical quality registries, actually operate using an opt-out consent model. But what we find is that across the sector nationally, that the regulatory approaches and approvals are actually inconsistent. So it makes it actually quite hard and challenging for us. The purpose is about identifying variations in care and collection at population scale. Therefore, it's imperative and important to actually collect everybody to minimise that selection bias. So just then onto the SAHMRI Registry Centre, which was established in 2018. And I just wanted to show you a couple of slides here just to let you know the types of things that what we actually do here in SAHMRI. So we provide sort of an advocacy platform where you could email me or call me. I want some more information. And so what we really then do is actually identify opportunities for collaboration, connection, and share needs with people. And then identify opportunities to advocate and raise awareness around the value and impact of registries, and join people together. We also do a lot of capacity building and workforce development. So we act as a knowledge broker. We assist member registries to achieve improved outcomes, and we also identify capability gaps and emerging needs across member registries and the broader sector. So some of you may have actually participated in some of our seminars or symposiums that have been based here at SAHMRI. The other thing that we do is we do look at the structure and governance and operations of registries. So making sure that you've actually got the right expertise and representation across those structures. And again, we provide that sort of advisory support. We also provide guidance on the best practice in registry design, management and oversight, as well as support facilitate the implementation of the national strategy and the framework. That's really what we're about. We also move into that advancing registry science space where we support the translation of the registry information and output into policy and practice, and demonstrate the value and real world outcomes. And then, a couple of other things that we do. So, participate in the grant applications and facilitate sort of member engagement. At the moment, we have 27 registries, and you can see there in that diagram on the right-hand side, we talked about health services earlier. So these are our domains. We talked about health services, we talked about disease or condition registries, and we talked about product registries. So you can see here of the 27 registries, we've got sort of, representation in each of those. Even though we call ourselves the SAHMRI Registry Centre, only 12 of the 27 actually physically sit here in the building that I'm sitting in at the moment. But of those 27, you can see also that, some of them have some binational geographic coverage. Some of them are just based here in South Australia. Some are just within one LHN. So there's a bit of a range across the types of members that we have as well. And finally, just to finish off, I just wanted to, we talked about value and impact, which is probably not really a topic for this presentation, but I think that it's an opportunity for you to sort of see that there are a number of different resources that you can access on our website. This is one example where you can quite easily go in and have a look at this, and it will actually describe a number of our different member registries, the work that they do and the impacts that they've actually had. So there are other resources available, such as, you know, step-by-step guides for establishing a registry, guides for engaging with consumers, as well as this case study as well. Now I think I'm handing over to you, Andrew.
Great. Thanks, Tamara, and thanks for such a great talk and introduction. So Karen, Saxty and I are talking to you from southern Adelaide, where, apologies, the room looks a little bit odd, but the camera is sitting up there and giving us this long view. But anyway, hopefully look at the slides and not look at us too much. So we're going to talk a little bit, I'll just give an introduction here, a little bit about clinical registries, try not to overlap too much with Tamara's excellent discussion. And then Karen will talk in some detail about the data governance framework that we have in Southern Adelaide and how we apply that to registries, or how we're developing that for the registries. Just as I'm starting, I do want to recognise that we're also meeting on Kaurna land and pay our respects to all other native title holders. We're putting a slightly different frame on this, if I do, from a health network, is, you know, one of the key issues that we have is how do we embed a health learning system in our network. So this is a diagram that I've just taken from our strategy. Nothing fancy about it. It's looking at how we use data through an improvement cycle to start to improve how we do things. But the data sources here might be a clinical quality registry, so we get the information that Tamara has talked about, registries, database and audits, the electronic medical record, a data lake or the data analytics platform, virtual registries, which is mentioned in one of the one of the commission documents there, and prems and proms. So there's lots of different ways that we would put data into these improvement cycles. And there's a commonality about that, which is actually how we manage the data, how we think about the data there. So I won't spend too much time talking about this because Tamara's talked about clinical quality registries, but I will talk a little bit about the virtual registry idea, which is where we take data from EMR or a data lake, data analytics platform might be a source of that. And these tend to be regional, but they can be broader than that. You can use various techniques to take data from here and actually share it with other sites. You can use a federated data methodology and keep the data here, but actually get insights from all of these different places as well. When we look at that, we're trying to do with all of these things, maximise the value for quality and how we improve those things. And so you can see that without looking at this diagram in a lot of detail, there are lots of data sources that we use and we use that data to get insights to improve our quality. So the data may come in for a clinical quality register through three sort of mechanisms. One is a centrally hosted jurisdictional model. These next three diagrams do come from the commission document, but just without thinking about it too much, I'm trying to follow the data here a little bit, in that you might have hospital A or hospital B, and the data will go to a jurisdictional clinical quality registry hosting platform. There might be other organisations that have data in here, but it sits in a central site. The second model is that the CQR itself as a host hosts the data. And that might be hosted locally within health, so that we might have It could be hosted within, health in South Australia or health in another jurisdiction. And again, either the data that's within our net, within health goes in there. We might have data coming from other jurisdictions that goes into that site. But again, the data is moving across different platforms and across different places. And finally, you might have a standalone clinical quality registry with a third-party provider where you've got an external data hosting platform. Again, the data is moving, and depending on what you're doing with the data, we might need to think about this slightly differently. And the context here is that many of these registries have been around for some period of time. So I think Tamara mentioned the intensive care registry, which I think dates back now, well, probably dates back over 30 years, Tamara. And I don't think we knew how to spell governance 30 years ago. It's a new part of the new language that we have today. So I think what we must recognise is that we will have legacy issues going forwards, and some of these are addressed and some of these have not been fully considered or fully understood within that framework. So we've been thinking about data privacy and data protection, and we have certain accountabilities in South Australia here, but in a global sense, I just talk quickly about what's happened globally and then about what's happened in South Australia. There's the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, which was effective in the European Union through about 2018, and now that's pretty close to a global model. We don't use that in Australia, but I was very interested the other day to look at some work that was being done, and this company, it was being done in Australia, but the company said we're GDPR compliant and that and it noted how it is. So the GDPR has actually changed a little bit of the way that we think about data, and you can see that there are 7 principles, a variety of ways of doing it, but lawfulness, fairness and transparency, accuracy, integrity, limitation of purpose, data minimisation, storage limitation. So, you must destroy the data once it's finished, its utility and accountability. So in Australia, we should be aware of the GDPR, but we are bound by the Privacy Act and by the Australian privacy principles. And so we interpret those in how we handle data. All of that is pretty much recognised now. I just put this up to this is a recent document that's come out of the Royal Australian College of Medical Administrators and the Australasian Institute of Digital Health. So this idea of data governance, particularly in the digital age, is, I think it is becoming really well embedded, but with it come a lot of challenges because the data can move quickly, and with these legacy pieces, it just changes the way that we think about it a bit. What I'm going to do now is hand over to Karen, and Karen's going to tell you what we're starting to do with that. Doesn't mean that that's perfect. We're on a journey here to embed data governance as it applies to registries and clinical quality registries, and to try to understand that and move along a pathway where we actually become understand what's happening to the data more fully, and help our teams handle their data so that it is compliant with the Privacy Act and so forth. So, and I was just giving the mouse over here to Karen so she can control the slide back.
Thanks, Andrew. So our data governance framework has been in place for probably about 18 months now, and the reason that we developed it was because navigating through all of the legislative policy and procedures in health was quite complex, and quite often there was a bit of overlap and some inconsistencies. So we really wanted to develop something that was much more simpler and easy to navigate, and we also wanted to establish some roles and responsibilities associated with decision making. So basically, the patient is at the core of everything we do in health, So if we were to look at the Charter of Healthcare Rights and we were going to apply that to data governance, our patients, when they encounter our system, can expect access to evidence-based care, and they should be assured that the data that we collect about them during their journey is kept safely, it's of the highest quality, and that we respect their privacy and confidentiality. And more importantly, that they are involved in everything that happens about them, and that includes what happens to their data. So our data governance framework is really a risk assessment. It's based on risk assessment. So basically, you know, as part of our health environment, we collect a lot of sensitive personal information about our patients, and we do that to make sure that we make the appropriate decisions and we apply the appropriate patient care services. We also collect data so that we can do a service evaluation and so that the care that we provide our patients is evidence-based. And that's generally where our clinical registries fit within. Even though we collect data through our patient management systems, that's what we would call our primary data collection method, but clinical registries are generally collecting information based on our patient management systems for a secondary purpose. And quite often patients don't provide consent to that. So quite often with a clinical registry, for example, they would be providing an opt-out consent. They would be given information about that registry, and if they wanted to opt out of that registry, they would be able to do so. Another reason we collect that information through our patient management system is to be transparent and communicate what's happened to that patient throughout their journey. But as you can imagine, with the collection of sensitive information, there's a huge risk in terms of who accesses that data. We need to make sure that all of the legislative obligations are applied and that the people accessing the data are aware of these. We need to make sure that the data, when it's being shared, it's being done in a de-identified format and it's not prone to any data breaches, and that it's also not vulnerable to any data loss, alteration, deletion, recreation or falsification. And then on top of all of this, there are also the outputs. So in terms of AI programs, for example, we need to make sure that data is not uploaded in an identifiable format to an AI program and lost to the cloud. And we also want to make sure there's no reputational risk in terms of publications and privacy breaches. So what happens to data when it leaves our auspices? Well, generally there's a lack of control. So if there's no consent, the sensitive identifiable clinical data could be shared with a third party. It might be linked with other data sets. Quite often people think that they've de-identified their data appropriately, but sometimes if you let things like a certain condition or perhaps a hospital, quite often when it's linked with another data set, it can be re-identified quite easily. So what we've done with our data governance framework is we've used this risk-based approach to put in some risk mitigation strategies. So basically I'll go through that a little bit later on, but basically we identify what category of risk the particular project may be, and we might put in some contracts, for example, which talks about our expectations and what happens to that data. We might put in some confidentiality agreements for people if they're actually not working in our facilities, and we would have some sort of oversight with some data management plans, and which would provide us with appropriate rules and regulations. As part of our data management and accountability process, we have our data access request pathway, and that's primarily for secondary access to our patient management systems. And this is based on the 5 Safes risk framework, which is a contemporary framework that is being used globally and nationally in many, many different organisations. And basically it's based on the safe people, safe projects, safe settings, safe data and safe outputs. I'm not going to go in great detail about that. But anything that sits within the green here would be classified as low risk, and we wouldn't really need to put in any risk mitigation strategies related to that. As you can see, as it starts to move up the ladder, it becomes yellow, orange and red. We would then work towards bringing the risk associated with those projects into the low risk category by introducing some contracts or some confidentiality deeds or things like that, or perhaps organising a meeting and trying to modify the design of the actual project. So basically our data access request is making sure that the people that access the data are qualified to be able to do so, that the data collection is feasible within our SA Health systems, and that the data management plan really addresses the purpose of the study. They've addressed data sovereignty in terms of Indigenous people and the impact statement, that they've sought the appropriate research ethics and governance approvals, and that they adhere to the legislation, policy and procedures. And if they're going to publish their work, where are they going to publish the work and in what format, and do we need to be aware of any risk to our institution or any patient privacy breaches. So when we started to look at developing a clinical registry framework, it's generally based on our data governance framework, but with some additional requirements. As Tamara alluded to earlier, you definitely need a strong governance leadership structure, data custodianship or stewardship, somebody that's going to have oversight of that clinical registry and to make sure that the people that access the registry are appropriate and that the data is stored safely and it's collected in that has some quality assurance and reporting outlets so that it can be fed back into our continuous improvement loop so that we can embed it into our standards so that we can provide the best based care for our patients. We want to make sure that the data management plan addresses all of these requirements and that that the systems that they're proposing using adheres to our digital health requirements and that they have sought approval for that particular system to be used in SA Health. We want to make sure that there's some annual compliance and lifestyle oversight, and that would feed back into the data stewardship, and that they've also taken a risk assessment approach, and that there are processes established for review, maintenance and closure of that particular registry. And as Tamara alluded to earlier, financial sustainability, because registries we would hope would be here for the long term so that we can collect information that's really going to help our community going forward. So what our framework will need to do, it will need to apply to our institution, it will need to help our staff, and it will also help with our external collaborators in terms of guiding the processes going forward. So why do we need a clinical registry on top of the Commission's clinical quality registry document? Well, based on the information that they provided, this is straight out of the Commission's document. So if we were to look at data, we would want to make sure that the data that we collect is done so safely and it's of good quality and that the appropriate consent has been provided. In terms of information, we would want to make sure that the risk has been clearly identified and that there's some clear escalation pathways, especially in relation to outliers, for example. If there was an impact to our patients' care, we would want to know about that fairly quickly. We would want to make sure that some strong reporting guidelines and some digital integration in terms of our SA Health, the digital health requirements. In terms of wisdom, we would want to make sure that all of the reports that come out of the registries will drive our continuous improvement and evidence-based practice. And on top of all of this, we would want some standardisation so that we're minimising any administrative friction while supporting high-risk complex registries. So these are some of the considerations that we need to embed. It's as you can see, it's quite extensive, but we really want to make sure that it provides consistent enterprise-wide governance model to reduce variation and stabilise risk. We want to enable registry owners to articulate values, sustainability and alignment with our community needs. And we want to move beyond compliance and move more into a strategic data stewardship of data assets across clinical, digital and research domains. So what this means is that we really need to consider all of the registries that we contribute to. So we have our internal registries, as Andrew mentioned earlier, but we also have our collaborative registries that are being managed externally that we're providing data to support those registries. We also have some legacy registries that have been operating for up to 30 years that we really need to bring in alignment with our data governance framework, and that's just that's going to take some time to actually be able to do that. Obviously, as Andrew mentioned earlier, we need to define what we classify as a registry. We want to adhere to all of our legislative, state, national policies and procedures. We want to make sure that our digital systems have reviewed any systems being proposed for a registry. Once again, that there's a risk assessment put in place, that it's feasible and sustainable, there's appropriate data management, and of course, over all of this, we've got our data governance framework that should sit sort of like an umbrella to make sure that everything is, all of the data is collected in a safe way. So our strategic vision is that registries will be a cornerstone of excellence, supporting modern data-driven care, leverage digital health, data science and evidence-based practice. It will be our commitment to ethical data use and strong governance, and it will align with our existing framework, strategic direction, state and national legislation, policy and procedures. I'm not going to go too much into detail about that because I think Tamara and Andrew both elaborated on that. But what I would like to mention is that our registry won't include anything like admin data sets, EMI dashboards or one-off audits. So we really wanted to make sure that we're quite clear on that. Registry life cycle, I'm not going to go too much into that as I think Tamara covered that quite well. But I think the really important part of this is the difference between data stewardship and data custodianship. For example, Andrew is our SALHN data custodian, but in terms of data stewardship, while we can set the rules and regulations and what happens to the data, a data steward more or less has the oversight of what happens to the registry data to make sure that it's being collected in a safe way and that it's being reported appropriately in terms of KPIs and so forth. So these are some of the barriers that we've identified for people wanting to wanting SAHMRI to contribute to their registries, but mostly a lot of these are attributed to the lack of early engagement with governance, digital health or our research teams. And the other one is the issue of consent. While a lot of registries do use the opt-out consent, and that's okay, we just want to make sure that our patients have been given enough time to read the information so that they can actually be informed about what's happening to their data so that they can appropriately opt out if they would like to going forward. Obviously, we want to make sure that the purpose of the registry is going to benefit SAHMRI and our priorities, and that it's going to be there for the long term and that it has the appropriate funding and support. Quite often people, if they're not aware of our data governance framework, may have some process requirements that we might want to have a look at and perhaps align it within our data governance framework. Yes, and obviously we would want to make sure there's some business rules in terms of data quality and manual data entry and so forth. So now come to the end of our presentation.
Okay, even though all of that seems like a lot of work and hard for people who are getting into the business. I think the issue is we should do it right together. In other words, we're here, groups like us, and I think most groups in SAHMRI, same thing, are here to do it right together. We have got all of these regulations and policies and procedures that we need to abide by in SA Health, but I think it is doing it together. Do it inside, do it inside the tent. We'll work it out. Sometimes that'll require some modifications, but the plan is not to stop things from going ahead, but to do them as safely as possible. So I'll stop there and just hand over for our next section, which might be questions, I think.
It is. Thank you very much to both of our presenters there.